Welcome back to the AI Analysis Podcast. Today, we're going where Jake and Justin have gone before.
Oh, nice opening.
Thanks. Yeah, we're diving into a really funny, just highly comedic analysis by the host of the Final Frontier podcast. They recently unpacked this classic, or maybe infamous is a better word, piece of 1960s television.
Right, the original Star Trek series, Season 1, Episode 15, Shore Leave.
Exactly. And our mission for this deep dive is to figure out, exactly how an utterly exhausted, completely overworked production team managed to create this bizarre, logic-defying fever dream of an episode. Because it really perfectly encapsulates that chaotic charm of early sci-fi.
It really does. It's just a wild ride.
Yeah, and for you listening, if you've ever wondered what would happen if your unfiltered, exhausted subconscious suddenly manifested in the physical world around you, well, this deep dive proves the results would be equal parts hilarious, incredibly dangerous, and just completely baffling.
Yeah, I mean, the premise itself is basically a psychological pressure cooker. We're looking at a story where the crew of the Enterprise beams down to this seemingly tranquil planet, right, in the Omicron Delta system.
Right, they think they're on vacation.
Exactly. They are desperate for a break. But instead, they find out that whatever they are actively thinking about suddenly physically materializes right in front of them.
Which, sounds like a utopian dream until you realize how little control human beings actually have over their stray thoughts. I mean, my brain is a mess most of the time.
Oh, totally. It's a disaster waiting to happen.
But to really understand why the script feels so frantic and, hallucinatory, we have to look at the very real exhaustion happening behind the camera. The irony here is just staggering.
It really is.
Yeah.
Because the plot is about a crew that has been on nonstop operations for 3 months, right?
Right.
But meanwhile, Gene Roddenberry, the creator of the show, he was living a much more severe version of that reality. By the time the script was approved for pre-production, he had been working at a breakneck pace for 2 solid years.
2 years straight. That is brutal.
Yeah, I mean, he had produced an entirely different series called The Lieutenant, sold Star Trek to NBC, and then just pushed it through this initial grueling production phase that, modern television crews would completely balk at.
Oh, absolutely. Today, a prestige TV show might film, 8 episodes over a year?
Right, but in the 1960s, they were grinding out nearly 40 episodes a season. The physical toll on him was immense. It got to the point where his doctor formally ordered him to step away and take a vacation.
But he absolutely ignored that medical advice.
Right,
Well,
completely ignored it.
instead of resting on a beach somewhere, Roddenberry was literally sitting under a tree on the actual set, frantically rewriting this very script.
Yeah.
While the crew was actively filming it a few feet away.
It's just wild to think about.
It makes me think of, a college student at the library. It's 3 a.m., you're heavily caffeinated, and you are just hallucinating your way through a final paper. The grammar might be terrible, the structure is totally gone, but somehow, in your sleep-deprived state, you accidentally write one paragraph of pure, unhinged genius. But let me ask you, does the sheer randomness of the episode actually work in its favor? Capturing the genuine incoherence of an exhausted human mind?
I think so, yeah. And that analogy maps perfectly onto the original writer of the episode, Theodore Sturgeon. He's actually the namesake of the famous Sturgeon's Law from 1951, which states that 90% of everything ever written is crap.
Oh, wow. That's bleak, but probably true.
Yeah. And Jake and Justin on the Final Frontier podcast, they have a field day with this concept. They make the argument that, yes, 90% of this specific episode is indeed crap. I mean, it's chaotic, it lacks basic narrative structure, and it breaks its own rules constantly.
Well, I have to push back on that 90% figure being entirely the fault of the writers, though.
Oh, really? How so?
Well, if you look at the 1960s syndication model, the sheer volume of television being produced practically guaranteed most of it would fail. I mean, they weren't writing literature. They were feeding a massive machine that demanded content every single week. You just can't be brilliant every Tuesday.
That's a fair point. And honestly, that volume is exactly why Sturgeon coined the law in the first place. When you are forcing out that much material, the quality control inevitably slips. But the Final Frontier hosts point out that the remaining 10% of this episode, the part that isn't crap, is so purely fun, imaginative, and just accidentally brilliant that it elevates the whole thing.
It becomes a masterpiece of 1960s television, right?
Exactly. The writer's real-world exhaustion bled directly into the character's subconscious chaos on screen. Because when the human mind is deprived of rest, it doesn't produce linear, logical narratives, it produces fragments.
Right. Memories, anxieties, random bits of pop culture just floating to the surface.
Yeah, which brings us to what actually manifests on the surface of this planet. Dr. McCoy, who is this incredibly serious, often grumpy chief medical officer, is wandering through the woods and suddenly encounters a giant anthropomorphic white rabbit.
Just completely out of nowhere.
Out of nowhere. And it's followed immediately by a young blonde girl in a blue dress. So a literal walking Alice in Wonderland manifestation just drops into a sci-fi setting.
And the brilliance of that scene really relies entirely on DeForest Kelley's comedic timing as McCoy. Because he doesn't play it with sheer terror. You know?
Not at all.
He plays it as a man who immediately assumes his own brain has finally snapped under the pressure of deep space travel. He actively tries to apply rigid logic to a completely illogical situation.
Yeah, it's his ultimate comfort blanket for an analytical mind. He rationalizes that because he knows he is seeing a giant rabbit, he must be hallucinating.
Right, and because he is aware it's a hallucination, he passes his own little psychological test. Like a truly crazy person wouldn't question their own sanity, therefore his brain is totally fine.
He essentially diagnoses himself with sanity in the middle of a fever dream. It's so good. But the Final Frontier podcast argues that the funniest manifestation actually belongs to Sulu.
Oh, the hobbies.
Yes, purely because of how it highlights the bizarre approach to character development in early television. Up to this point in the series, Sulu has been established as a botanist.
Which is a perfectly normal, relaxing hobby for a guy flying a starship.
Right, but then, not long after, we find out he's also into fencing.
Sure, staying active.
Then boxing. Later, we learn he pilots vintage helicopters. The writers constantly gave him new, highly specific interests based entirely on whatever the plot of the week demanded.
Which is fascinating when you think about how modern audiences expect deep, serialized character bibles.
Huh?
Today, fans would tear a show apart on Reddit if a character's backstory changed every week.
Oh, they would be furious.
But in the 60s, because of the syndication episodic reset, executives just didn't care. They figured audiences were watching episodes out of order on a random Tuesday, so character consistency didn't matter. Sulu needed a new hobby for a visual gag, so boom, Sulu is now a firearms enthusiast.
And highly reckless firearms enthusiast at that. He's wandering through the alien brush, looks down, and finds a pristine, antique, cult police positive revolver just resting in the dirt.
Okay, I have to ask, are we absolutely sure this Starfleet crew is highly trained? Because the safety protocols here are staggering. If you see a random antique gun on an alien planet, the worst possible reaction is to start firing it into the bushes like it's a new toy.
It really is.
I mean, he doesn't scan it. He doesn't call it in. He just starts firing it wildly for fun. Zero trigger discipline in an area where he knows his own crewmates are walking around.
So bad. But it sets up an incredibly funny structural joke that Jake and Justin highlight on the podcast. Kirk eventually tracks Sulu down, confiscates the revolver because his officer is acting like a literal child, and then Kirk just tucks the loaded antique gun directly into his own waistband.
Wait, I need to stop you there, because the podcast refers to this as a literal Chekhov's gun. But why is it a Chekhov's gun if the character Pavel Chekhov hasn't even been introduced in the series yet? He doesn't show up until season 2, right?
Right, and that is the accidental genius of the joke. The term Chekhov's gun actually comes from the Russian playwright Anton Chekhov.
Oh, I see where this is going.
Yeah, he famously formulated a dramatic principle that states, if you show a loaded gun on the mantelpiece in the first act of a play, it absolutely must go off by the third act. Basically, do not introduce a prop if it doesn't have a payoff.
Oh, wow. That makes so much more sense. So the Final Frontier hosts are pointing out the absurd double meaning. Kirk is wandering around the planet with a literary device, Anton Chekhov's gun, waiting for it to go off in the third act, while the actual crew member, Pavel Chekhov, is nowhere to be found.
Exactly. It is a masterclass in accidental retroactive comedy. But, taking all these wild, disjointed ideas and translating them into a physical television production in 1966 was a massive undertaking.
Oh, for sure.
The ambition of the stunt choreography really shines through the exhaustion of the crew, particularly with Kirk's manifestation.
Right, because Kirk manifests an Irish prankster from his Starfleet Academy days named Finnegan. And we probably need to define what a prank meant in the 1960s, because Finnegan doesn't short sheet Kirk's bed. He doesn't put a whoopee cushion on his captain's chair.
No, not at all.
His idea of a practical joke is walking up to Kirk and just absolutely clocking him in the jaw.
It's just a straight punch to the face. And what follows is this inexplicably long, brutally physical fist fight. The Final Frontier hosts spend a lot of time analyzing the sheer realism of this choreography.
Yeah, modern action sequences rely so heavily on quick cuts, shaky cam and CGI enhancements to sell a hit. But here the action feels incredibly visceral. When you see William Shatner take a hip toss and slam into the dirt, it looks completely believable because he is literally getting thrown into the dirt.
They couldn't fake the physics. There's a tangible, practical reality to the action that somehow grounds the absolute absurdity of the plot. And speaking of physics that you simply cannot fake, Sulu doesn't just manifest a samurai out in the brush, he eventually manifests a live tiger.
Wait, a real tiger?
Yes. Not a guy in a tiger suit, not a forced perspective camera trick with a smaller animal. They brought a massive living tiger out on location.
They filmed a lot of this episode out in California at Vasquez Rocks, or Jagged Rock State Park, right?
Yeah.
Bringing an apex predator to a hot, dusty state park with an exhausted film crew sounds like a recipe for a horrific tragedy.
Oh, it gets worse. The original script actually called for something much more dangerous. The script didn't just instruct the tiger to stand in the bushes and look menacing. The original draft called for William Shatner to physically wrestle the tiger.
I genuinely cannot comprehend the lack of self-preservation there.
Well, hold on, it gets crazier. William Shatner actually wanted to do it.
Wait.
Yeah. He was entirely on board with grappling a live apex predator for television.
Of course he was. The man has never met a piece of scenery he didn't want to conquer, and apparently that extends to deadly wildlife.
Yeah, it was the production team that finally stepped in, acted like the adults in the room, and shut the idea down entirely. They flat out refused to let their leading man get into a physical altercation with a tiger.
Which is probably the only smart safety decision made in this entire production. And Jake and Justin go on this fascinating tangent about this on the podcast, discussing the stark reality of tiger safety. We look at them in zoos, they are beautiful, and their mannerisms often look exactly like giant house cats. It creates a false sense of security.
Right, and the podcast brings up a crucial point regarding animal sanctuaries. If you ever see a video online of a facility where human beings are casually walking inside the enclosure, wrestling, or playing with adult tigers, that is a massive red flag.
Huge red flag.
Reputable, ethical sanctuaries never, under any circumstances, let humans share physical space with these animals, no matter how tame or domesticated they seem to be.
It's just a matter of basic physics, isn't it?
Yeah.
Even if the tiger isn't actively hunting you and it just decides it wants to play, a playful swat from a 500-pound animal with claws can easily break a human neck. The animal's intent doesn't matter when the biological mismatch is that extreme. One instinctual reaction to a loud noise on set, and your leading man is gone.
Exactly. So they wouldn't let him wrestle the tiger, which, as you said, is a rare moment of clarity for the crew. But when we look at the actual rules of the planet they are standing on, the danger is actually much worse than an apex predator.
Speaking of surviving wild, high-stakes environments where anything can happen, let's take a quick sponsor break. All right, we are back. So the crew has survived real tigers, a wandering samurai, Irish brawlers, and their own terrible lack of trigger discipline. But now they have to reckon with the actual logic of the planet itself. And looking back at this episode through a modern lens, the underlying logic is just a massive HR nightmare, which the Final Frontier podcast dissects brilliantly.
Oh yeah, the cultural shifts since 1966 become glaringly obvious in the back half of the episode. The prime example Jake and Justin focus on involves Dr. McCoy and Yeoman Barrows.
Oh boy.
Yeah, Yeoman Barrows is already having a uniquely terrible shore leave. She had previously been accosted by a physical manifestation of Don Juan. Her uniform is torn, she is highly distressed, and suddenly a medieval princess dress just magically appears out of thin air in front of them.
And Dr. McCoy, who is her superior officer and the chief medical officer responsible for her well-being, essentially encourages her to strip out of her torn uniform and put this mysterious, unvetted alien dress on right there in the middle of the woods.
It's so bad. And he follows up that suggestion with a line that was undoubtedly written to sound charming and roguish in the 1960s. He tells her, "Madam, I'm a doctor. When I peek, it's in the line of duty."
Ugh, it makes your skin crawl today.
Yeah.
The Final Frontier hosts rightly call this out as a staggering human resources violation. It's safe to assume the Starship Enterprise clearly does not have an HR department, or McCoy would be buried in paperwork. But this incredibly uncomfortable moment actually sets up the climax of the episode, right?
It does, yeah. Yeoman Barrows, now fully dressed as a medieval princess, naturally has her thoughts drift toward a knight in shining armor.
Of course.
And because the planet instantly materializes whatever you were thinking about, a medieval knight on horseback immediately manifests in the woods, lowers a jousting lance, and charges directly at them.
And McCoy is still clinging to his internal logic loop here. He firmly believes that because he knows he is hallucinating, he is perfectly sane, and therefore an illusion cannot physically harm him, so he just stands his ground in front of a charging horse.
Which is a catastrophic miscalculation. The knight hits him at full speed, and Dr. McCoy is literally impaled and killed on screen.
It is a genuinely shocking moment for a 1960s television audience. A core cast member is suddenly dead in the dirt. And how is this high-stakes emotional trauma resolved? Kirk doesn't mourn, he doesn't attempt diplomacy, he pulls an Indiana Jones, whips out the antique revolver he confiscated from Sulu, finally firing Anton Chekhov's gun in the third act, and just shoots the knight dead.
Yeah, that abrupt escalation demands a massive explanation, which the show delivers through the sudden appearance of an elderly man who calls himself the caretaker.
Convenient timing.
Very. This character magically steps out of the brush and explains the grand mystery. The entire planet isn't a hostile alien trap, it is simply an incredibly advanced amusement park.
An amusement park designed to read the thoughts of visitors and bring their fantasies to life so they can play.
Right, and as proof that it's all in good fun, the caretaker gestures and Dr. McCoy suddenly reappears.
Just like that.
Just like that. He is completely alive, his uniform isn't even torn, and he happens to be flanked by two gorgeous Virgilian cabaret girls that he apparently thought up the moment he was resurrected underground.
The resolution is just wild. The caretaker basically says, sorry for the misunderstanding. The underground machinery repairs any damage. The constructs aren't meant to cause permanent harm. Enjoy the park. But if an amusement park lets you actually die, even temporarily, just to give you an authentic experience, isn't that a massive lawsuit waiting to happen? Why does Kirk just accept this trust me bro explanation from the caretaker?
Because there is zero lingering trauma allowed. McCoy just experienced the physical sensation of his own brutal death, and Kirk surveys the situation and actually decides to authorize shore leave. He tells the rest of the crew to beam down and stick around for a few more days. The podcast perfectly summarizes this as Space Las Vegas. Whatever happens on the weird, lethal dream planet stays on the weird, lethal dream planet.
The syndication format strikes again. The writers had exactly 50 minutes to introduce a planet, kill a main character, solve the mystery, and hit the giant reset button so the crew could be perfectly fine for next week's completely unrelated adventure. They didn't have time to explore the complex moral and safety implications of a planet that can kill and resurrect you on a whim. The complex implications are completely waved away in favor of a fast, happy ending.
Which honestly perfectly mirrors the chaotic structure of the Final Frontier podcast itself.
Oh, absolutely.
Jake and Justin wrap up their own deep dive on this Star Trek episode by completely abandoning the plot to share this totally unprompted, factual tangent about Adolf Hitler's anatomy.
Yeah, they dive into medical records, proving the dictator only had one descended testicle, which has absolutely nothing to do with Star Trek, space exploration, or 1960s television production.
Not a single connecting thread. Yet, it perfectly illustrates the wild, unscripted, conversational nature of the podcasting medium. You can start out analyzing a giant white rabbit in space, and an hour later, you are deep in the weeds of historical medical oddities.
It is the exact same unfiltered thought process that the Shore Leave planet itself runs on. The podcast format allows for that rapid-fire, chaotic association of ideas, much like the planet physically manifests whatever random thought flashes through the crew's minds.
Yeah, and the core concept of a world that instantly caters to your deepest subconscious desires and stray thoughts is pitched by the show as the ultimate fantasy vacation. But, as the podcast hosts point out, it is actually a terrifying monkey's paw scenario. To exist safely on that planet, you would have to maintain an impossible, agonizing level of mental discipline.
The moment your mind wanders to a threat, like a shadow in the woods, a scary movie you just watched, an anxiety you've been suppressing, that threat becomes immediately real and tries to kill you.
Exactly. It requires you to never, ever let your guard down, which is the exact opposite of a relaxing vacation.
It makes me think about what we are currently building right now in the real world. We don't have a magical planet in the Omicron Delta system, but we do have generative AI. We are rapidly building technology that instantly generates images, text, and videos based on whatever stray thought we type into a prompt box. We are creating systems designed to instantly manifest our subconscious desires onto a screen, often with very few safety guardrails. Are we essentially building our own digital shore leave amusement park? And if we are, how long until our own unfiltered, chaotic thoughts start impaling us with the consequences? If you're a Trekkie and haven't subscribed to the Final Frontier podcast, you absolutely need to. Their link is in the description. We'll see everyone next time. Watch long and prosper.
The Final Frontier podcast. These are the voyages of Jake Boger and Justin Spur. Our weekly mission: to explore memories of Star Trek's strange new worlds, to recall the search for new life and new civilizations, to boldly go where no one has had the spare time to go before.